You are sitting in front of a polished piece of bronze on the morning of your wedding. You have no foundation, no mascara, no setting spray, and no beauty blenders. Instead, your beauty routine involves a heavy jar of animal fat, a handful of crushed beetles, and a thick, pungent paste made from actual, lethal poison. And the wildest part? You look deep into that piece of metal, knowing exactly what these ingredients are doing to your body, and you feel absolutely stunning. You are ready to walk out there and be the most flawless thing anyone has ever seen. But getting to this specific moment has required a level of physical endurance, chemical warfare, and sheer pain that would send any modern person running out the door in absolute terror. We look back at ancient history and tend to assume that because people did not have cosmetic laboratories or department stores, they just did not care about the aesthetic of a wedding day. We assume they just washed their faces, put on a clean tunic, and hoped for the best. That assumption is completely backwards. The pressure to look utterly flawless on the day you were married in the ancient world was immense, arguably much higher than it is today. Marriage was rarely about romance. It was a business contract, an alliance between families, and a highly public display of power. The bride's physical appearance was the ultimate reflection of her family's wealth, status, and honor. She could not just look nice. She had to look like a living deity. But without modern chemistry to safely mass-produce makeup, ancient brides had to turn to the natural world. And the natural world is completely ruthless. The methods women used to achieve bridal perfection were extreme, highly toxic, and undeniably effective. If you were a wealthy bride in ancient Rome or Greece, the absolute gold standard for bridal beauty began with a complexion that was completely, unnaturally white. You did not want to look sun-kissed. A tan meant you spent your days working in the agricultural fields. You wanted to look like you had never seen the harsh light of the sun in your entire life. Pale skin was a visible, undeniable receipt of your extreme privilege. So, on the morning of your wedding, your attendants would start pasting your face, neck, and chest with something called Ceruse. Ceruse was a highly popular, highly expensive cosmetic made by taking heavy lead shavings and soaking them in bowls of sharp vinegar until a thick, white chemical reaction occurred on the metal. Servants would scrape off that white crust, grind it into a fine powder, mix it with animal fat or olive oil, and slather it all over your skin. It worked beautifully. It gave the bride a brilliantly opaque, smooth, porcelain finish that hid every blemish and scar. It also slowly and deliberately poisoned her. Lead is a heavy metal that the human body cannot easily expel. It sinks directly through the pores of the skin and absorbs right into the bloodstream. Over time, regularly applying Ceruse caused severe lead poisoning. The bride's teeth would start to rot. Her hair would thin and fall out in clumps. Her actual skin would begin to corrode, developing deep gray and yellow blemishes. But this created a terrifying psychological trap for the ancient bride. Because the lead foundation was actively destroying her natural complexion, she had to apply even thicker, heavier layers of the toxic lead foundation just to cover up the damage caused by the previous layers. She was locked in a horrific beauty loop, sacrificing her actual long-term health for the temporary illusion of flawless skin. Having your scalp slowly poisoned by heavy metals was just considered a perfectly reasonable trade-off for a good wedding day glow. But a completely white face looks like a corpse, and a bride was supposed to symbolize life, fertility, and vitality. She needed vivid color. Without a synthetic chemical dye factory, getting a vibrant, skin-safe red is remarkably difficult. Plant dyes like henna or red ochre worked, but they were often muddy, earthy, or faded quickly in the heat. If an ancient bride wanted a piercing, luxurious crimson for her cheeks and lips, she needed bugs. Specifically, she needed scale insects like the cochineal or the kermes. These are tiny parasites that live on cactuses or oak trees across the Mediterranean and the Middle East. When you crush pregnant female scale insects, their insides produce carminic acid, which yields an unbelievably vivid, bright red dye. Bridal attendants would harvest thousands of these little beetles, dry them out under the brutal sun, and grind them into a fine, powdery paste. It took staggering numbers of insects, sometimes up to 70,000 beetles, just to produce a single pound of water-soluble dye. They would take this crushed bug powder, mix it with beeswax or a little bit of tallow, and the bride would smear the insect guts directly onto her lips and cheeks. The color payoff was intense. It was expensive. It was bold, and a handful of bugs could literally stain your mouth a brilliant red for days, no matter how much you ate or drank during the wedding feast. Then came the eyes. And this is where ancient beauty routines crossed the line from toxic into genuinely strange medical territory. In ancient Egypt and large parts of the Middle East, the wedding eye makeup was not just about making the eyes pop, though it certainly achieved that striking, dramatic look. It was heavy, dark, and highly functional. They used kohl, but ancient kohl was not the gentle, dermatologist-tested eyeliner pencil you pick up at a drugstore. Real ancient kohl was made by grinding up galena, which is a dark lead sulfide, or stibnite, which is a mineral containing antimony. Antimony is a highly toxic element. The bride was basically taking pulverized poisonous rocks, mixing them with soot and animal fat, and lining the highly delicate, absorbent membranes of her eyelids. But there was a bizarre, brilliant logic to this madness. The bride wasn't just painting her eyes with heavy metals for the aesthetic. Ancient weddings were massive, chaotic public gatherings, which meant hundreds of people staring directly at you. In these ancient cultures, the evil eye was a very real, very terrifying threat. People genuinely believed that a jealous glance or a bitter thought from a guest could physically curse the bride with infertility, sickness, or bad luck. The heavy, dark black kohl was meant to deflect the glare of the desert sun and symbolically ward off those evil spirits. But modern science has actually looked at this ancient practice and found something incredible. The specific lead compounds in ancient Egyptian makeup actually stimulate the production of nitric oxide in human skin. This ramps up the immune system and essentially acts as an antibacterial shield, helping fight off serious eye infections caused by bacteria in the floodplains of the Nile. So the bride was deliberately painting her eyes with poison, but that poison was actively defending her against blindness on her wedding day. And then you have to consider the smell. Imagine the reality of an ancient Egyptian or Middle Eastern wedding. You are in a dry, sweltering climate. There is no air conditioning, no electric fans, and certainly no clinical strength antiperspirant. There are hundreds of people packed into a stone courtyard, eating, drinking, and breathing on each other. How does a bride remain elegant and sweet-smelling when she is inevitably sweating heavily in the midday heat? You cannot just spray a mist of perfume, because alcohol-based aerosol perfumes do not exist yet. The solution they engineered was both absolute genius and wildly messy. The bride would wear a massive wax cone on top of her head. Historical records and tomb paintings repeatedly show ancient Egyptians attending feasts, ceremonies, and weddings with large, yellowish, dome-like cones strapped directly to the top of their elaborate wigs. Historians and archaeologists have deduced that these cones were made of solid animal fat, usually purified beef or sheep tallow, that had been heavily infused with incredibly expensive aromatics like myrrh, frankincense, cinnamon, cardamom, and lotus flowers. Before stepping out into the public ceremony, a solid block of this heavily spiced fat was secured to the crown of the bride's head. As the wedding went on and the temperature in the courtyard steadily rose, the fat would slowly begin to melt. It would liquefy, dripping down through the braids of her wig, sliding down her neck, and coating her shoulders in a shimmering, heavily perfumed grease. It sounds like an absolute sensory nightmare if you are wearing expensive linen, but to them, this was the absolute pinnacle of luxury. It was essentially an ancient, slow-release wearable perfume dispenser. The bride was a walking, melting candle of wealth. It really ruins the modern concept of doing your hair, when the ultimate goal of the style is to have a chunk of spiced beef fat liquefy all over your forehead. But it brilliantly and continuously solved the problem of body odor in a world without deodorant. But all of this, the lead foundation, the beetle lipstick, the poison eyeliner, and the melting fat was just the finishing touch. The real agony of ancient bridal preparation started days before the wedding, and it was entirely focused on extreme body modification. In ancient Rome, Egypt, and large swaths of the ancient world, absolute hairlessness was a strict, non-negotiable requirement for a bride. Body hair was considered deeply uncivilized, dirty, and unacceptable for someone stepping into the elevated role of a wife. But again, they did not have laser hair removal clinics. They did not have soothing aloe vera wax strips or electric razors. The most basic method for hair removal was simple, brutal abrasion. A bride would literally sit in a bath while her attendants took rough, volcanic pumice stones and manually sanded the hair off her arms, legs, and body. They would just aggressively grind the porous stone against her wet skin until the friction sheared the hair away. If you have ever used a pumice stone on a tough foot callus, imagine dragging that coarse rock across your shins and thighs until the hair physically disappears. The skin was left raw, red, and tender. But if the bride was wealthy, she could afford something much more efficient and far more terrifying: a chemical depilatory. The ancient recipe for hair removal cream, sometimes referred to in historical texts as rusma or nura, was a thick, foul-smelling paste made primarily of two highly volatile ingredients. The first was quicklime, which is calcium oxide, a highly reactive chemical that burns hot when it comes into contact with moisture. The second was orpiment. Orpiment is a naturally occurring yellow mineral composed almost entirely of arsenic. Yes, literal arsenic. The bride would have this toxic paste slathered over her entire body. The attendants had to watch her like hawks, counting the seconds. The paste would rapidly break down the keratin structure in the hair, causing it to dissolve. But if they left it on even a fraction of a minute too long, the quicklime and arsenic would stop dissolving the hair and start dissolving the bride's actual skin. It was a terrifying race against time. Wait too little, the hair stays, and the bride is humiliated. Wait too long, she gets severe, blistering chemical burns that could easily become infected in the days leading up to her wedding. At the exact right moment, the attendants would frantically scrape the toxic paste off her body with a curved, dull metal blade called a strigil, taking all the dissolved hair with it. The depilatory creams used by ancient brides to get their legs perfectly smooth contained the exact same lethal arsenic that is used in commercial rat poison today. She endured this agonizing, highly dangerous, full-body chemical peel just to ensure she met the absolute standard of flawless smoothness. When we hear all of this, our immediate reaction is a kind of comfortable modern arrogance. We look back at these ancient women painting their faces with heavy metals, smearing crushed bugs on their mouths, melting beef fat on their heads, and burning their skin with arsenic. And we think they were primitive. We think they were desperate, uneducated people who didn't know any better. We assume we are much smarter and far more civilized today. But that assumption is completely wrong. They were not primitive. They were just the beta testers for the exact same beauty industry we actively participate in right now. You think a bride putting arsenic on her legs is crazy. Today, millions of people intentionally inject botulism, toxin, literally one of the most lethal naturally occurring neurotoxins on the planet, which we casually rebrand as Botox, directly into their facial muscles to temporarily paralyze them and prevent wrinkles for a wedding day. You think smearing crushed bugs on the lips is a disgusting piece of ancient history. The red dye extracted from those exact same cochineal beetles is called carmine, and it is still legally, widely, and highly profitably used today. If you have ever worn a premium, high-end red lipstick, or eaten brightly colored red candy, or drank a strawberry frappuccino, you have almost certainly put the exact same crushed bugs into your mouth that an ancient Egyptian bride did. We judge them for wearing animal fat on their heads. But right now, people are happily paying premium prices for luxury moisturizers made from purified snail slime and sheep sebum. The only actual difference between an ancient bride prepping for her wedding and a modern bride sitting in a salon chair is that we have successfully outsourced the danger to professional laboratories. We have scientists in white coats to refine the toxins, regulate the chemical dosage, and put it in sleek packaging. But the raw materials, the underlying chemistry, and the sheer, breathtaking lengths we will go to for a physical alteration are exactly the same. They were playing the exact same game. They were just playing it on hard mode without a safety net. And that is what makes looking at these ancient rituals entirely fascinating. You look back across thousands of years of human history, across collapsed empires, forgotten languages, and ruined cities, and you realize that the core human operating system hasn't changed a single bit. The intense desire to physically transform ourselves, to step out of our everyday skin and become something elevated, flawless, and untouchable for a major life event, is not some modern vanity invented by 20th century marketing executives. It is a deeply wired, ancient human instinct. The ingredients have evolved from raw toxic lead and quicklime to lab-tested formulas and hyaluronic acid. But the underlying psychology is identical. A bride bracing herself against the sting of a pumice stone 3 millennia ago, and a bride sitting perfectly still while her makeup artist applies a chemical peel today are separated by thousands of years. But they are participating in the exact same ritual. They are doing whatever it takes to look in that mirror, completely reinvented, and know they are ready.